Imagine you are a young child, laughing with your family in a peaceful village. Suddenly, strangers arrive at your door. Before you know it, you are pulled from your mother's arms, never to see your home again. This was the reality for thousands under Ottoman rule. Children stolen, families broken, and innocence lost forever. Behind every grand palace and golden dome was a world of deep pain and hidden suffering. Today we uncover the voices and stories that history tried to erase. Their pain is not forgotten. Their courage deserves to be remembered. This is the true story of the silenced. You are a young boy living in a quiet Christian village in the Balkans. You wake up to the sound of your mother's voice, and your life feels simple and safe. But today something is different. As you play outside, you see strangers riding into your village. They are wearing uniforms, and everyone seems scared of them. You do not know why, but you feel a cold fear in your heart. Your father pulls you close, and your mother tries to hide her tears. The strangers walk from house to house, talking to the elders, checking names and numbers. You do not understand their words, but you feel the worry and pain all around you. Suddenly your name is called. The officials look at you carefully. They check your age, your health, and your body, as if you are not even a person, just something to be chosen or rejected. You hear other children crying as they are pulled away from their families. Some mothers try to hold on to their sons, but the soldiers are strong and do not listen. You look into your mother's eyes one last time before you are taken. In just a few moments, your whole world changes. You realize you might never see your family or your home again. This is not just your story. For hundreds of years, the Ottoman Empire was one of the strongest and biggest empires in the world. It ruled over millions of people and many countries. People remember its great buildings, powerful sultans, and famous victories. But behind these golden stories, there was a much darker reality for many people. To really understand this darkness, we must go back to the beginning, to the moment when Ottoman officials came to villages like yours. This is the story of the Devshirme, also called the blood tax, and how it changed lives forever. The Devshirme, or blood tax, was a system used by the Ottoman Empire to take Christian boys from their families. This happened for many years, especially in the Balkans and Eastern Europe. Every few years, Ottoman officials came to small villages. They carried papers and lists, which told them how many boys should be taken and from which families. The officials usually chose boys between the ages of 7 and 20, but they liked younger boys more. Sometimes they even took children as young as 4 or 5. The families tried to hide their sons, but the officials knew where to look. They counted every family and every child, so it was almost impossible to escape. When the officials arrived, the whole village was filled with fear. Parents begged, cried, or even offered money to save their children. But the system was strict. The officials did not listen to anyone. They looked at each boy carefully, checking if he was healthy and strong. They wanted the best boys, the ones who seemed smart, good-looking, and healthy. The boys who were chosen were taken from their homes right away. They had no time to say goodbye to friends or family. Sometimes their mothers would try to hold them back, crying and screaming, but the soldiers would separate them by force. Some parents would hurt or scar their own children, hoping the officials would not choose them. But most of the time nothing worked. The journey for the boys began as soon as they were chosen. They were put together in groups, sometimes with children from different villages, and marched across long distances. The journey was hard. The boys missed their families. They were hungry, scared, and confused. Many could not understand the language of their captors. They only understood that they would never return home. As the boys traveled, Ottoman officials wrote down every detail. They kept lists of names, ages, health, and where each boy came from. They were very organized because the empire wanted to keep track of its new property. The boys were like numbers in a list. Their old names were often changed as soon as the journey began. After days or even weeks of travel, the boys arrived in the center of the Ottoman Empire, in cities like Constantinople. Here everything was strange and different. The language, the food, the clothes, all were new. The boys were taken to special schools or places where they would be trained for a new life. The pain for the families left behind was deep. Many mothers waited for years, hoping their sons would come back. But almost none did. Most boys were never allowed to write letters or visit home again. The empire did not want them to remember their past. They were meant to forget their families, their language, and even their religion. For those taken, their world changed forever, not just in where they lived but in who they would become. The real transformation began behind palace walls and inside the empire's most elite core. After the boys were taken from their villages, they were brought to big cities in the Ottoman Empire, such as Constantinople. The life they found there was completely different from everything they had known. The very first thing that happened was that the boys were separated from anyone who spoke their language. This was not by accident. It was done so the boys would feel lost and would have to learn to depend on their new masters. The boys were given new clothes and new names. They were not allowed to speak their old language, and anyone who tried to talk about their family or home was punished. Slowly, the boys forgot the sounds of their mother tongue and the faces of their parents. The Ottomans wanted to turn them into something new, loyal servants of the empire who would never look back. Next, the boys were converted to Islam. This was not something they chose. It was forced upon them. They were taught new prayers, new rules, and new beliefs. Every sign of their old religion was taken away. They were taught that their old way of life was wrong and that their future only belonged to the empire. For many boys, this was very confusing and painful. Some tried to resist at first, but after months or years, almost all accepted their new lives, because they had no other choice. After their conversion, the boys were trained in special schools. They learned the Turkish language, how to read and write, and also many skills needed to serve the empire. The strongest and brightest boys were chosen to become Janissaries, the Sultan's elite soldiers. Being a Janissary was both an honor and a heavy burden. The Janissaries were famous across the world. They wore special uniforms and were treated with respect by the Sultan. But their lives were controlled in every way. The Janissaries were forced to live in barracks, away from normal people. They could not marry or have families. They had to stay loyal only to the Sultan and the empire. Their leaders watched them carefully. If anyone broke the rules, the punishment was harsh. Over time, this isolation made many Janissaries very close to each other. They formed strong friendships, and sometimes romantic or sexual relationships between the soldiers were common. This was not talked about openly, but it became a hidden part of Janissary life. The main goal of the empire was to make sure that the Janissaries had no real connection to their old lives. Their only loyalty was to the Sultan. This psychological reshaping was very deep. The boys who had once played in their home villages now marched in line, carried weapons, and followed orders without question. Even though some Janissaries became powerful and rich, most paid a high price. They could not ever return home. They could not speak about their past or remember their real families. They belonged to the empire body and soul. Yet, not all boys were destined for the Janissary barracks. For the youngest and most beautiful, the journey took an even darker turn, deeper into the palace and deeper into exploitation. Some boys, especially those who were very young or considered handsome, were not sent to become Janissaries. Instead, they were taken even deeper into the palace. Here their fate was even more cruel. These boys were chosen for the Sultan's personal service or for other powerful men in the empire. Their lives were filled with fear and pain, and they lost even the little freedom that soldiers had. Some of the boys were forced to become eunuchs. This meant that doctors or sometimes untrained people removed their testicles, or sometimes even more. This was a very dangerous and painful operation. Many boys died during the process because there were no safe medical tools or medicines. The few who survived often suffered for the rest of their lives, both in their bodies and their minds. The Ottomans believed eunuchs were safer to keep around women in the palace, so they were used as guards and servants. But these boys could never marry, have children, or live a normal life again. Other boys were chosen to be entertainers or dancers. They had to dress like women and dance for the Sultan and his guests. These performances were not innocent fun. Many times, the boys were abused during or after these events. They had no protection and could not refuse what the powerful men wanted. The palace was full of secrets, and the pain of these boys was hidden from the outside world. Sometimes, the most attractive boys were kept only for the pleasure of important officials. They were not given any official position or title. They were only objects, meant to serve the desires of others. These boys were completely powerless, and no one cared about their suffering. The boys who survived these experiences were changed forever. Most could never form healthy relationships later in life, because they had known only abuse and fear. Many grew up to become silent, empty, or angry adults. But boys weren't the only victims of this brutal system. As the empire expanded, so did its appetite for another form of human merchandise. Women and girls captured, traded, and consumed. In the Ottoman Empire, women and girls were also taken from their homes and sold as slaves. The slave trade was a big part of the empire's life. Many women came from faraway lands like Africa, the Caucasus, or the Balkans. Soldiers captured them during wars or raids. Sometimes traders bought young girls from poor families. These women were brought to the markets in cities like Constantinople, where they were sold to the highest bidder. In the slave markets, women and girls were lined up and examined by buyers. People checked their age, health, and looks. Younger girls, virgins, or women who were very beautiful were sold for higher prices. Sometimes, traders would lie about a girl's age to get more money. African women usually sold for less money if they were going to be used for housework, but their price went up if they were chosen for sexual use. European women, especially from Greece or the Balkans, were often sold for much higher prices. The most expensive were those who were selected to become special servants in the sultan's harem. These women were called odalisques. Life in the harem was very hard for most women. Many people imagine that harems were full of luxury, but the reality was different for most. The women were forced to live together, locked away from the outside world. They could not leave, make friends freely, or make any choices about their own lives. The harem was organized in a strict hierarchy. Some women were given better rooms or more food, but most lived in fear and competition. The women were trained to entertain the sultan or his guests. They learned singing, dancing, and even special skills to please the sultan. Every woman hoped to catch the sultan's eye, because only then could her life improve. Those who failed were left behind, often living in sadness and loneliness. Rivalry was strong, and women sometimes reported or betrayed each other, hoping to move up in the harem's ranking. Slave women had almost no rights. If a slave woman became pregnant, the child belonged to her master. The master could sell the child, keep it, or even kill it. In many cases, if a child was born to an African mother and a Turkish father, the baby was killed immediately after birth. The empire did this to stop mixed-race children from changing the social order. There were hardly any laws to protect slave women. If a free woman was raped, the rapist could be punished by death. But if a slave woman was raped, the punishment was only a small fine, as if she was just property. As the empire grew, the need for new slaves increased. Military leaders sometimes attacked towns just to capture women and girls. The empire's money depended on this trade. Rich men bought many women, and the sultan's palace was filled with hundreds, sometimes thousands of slaves. Some women spent their whole lives in the harem, never seeing their families again. For women who grew older or were no longer considered beautiful, life could get even worse. They might be sold to brothels, left on the street, or even killed to make room for younger women. There was no safety or future for most of these women. Children who grew up in the harem saw violence and betrayal everywhere. Some children were killed at birth. Others watched their mothers suffer. The constant fear, pain, and loneliness never ended. The women in the harem lived every day not knowing if they would be punished, sold, or simply forgotten. This vast machinery of exploitation was no accident. Behind it all stood a system run with chilling precision, recorded and managed by the empire's bureaucrats. The Ottoman Empire was very organized about its control over people's lives. including the lives of slaves. Officials kept detailed records of every person who was taken, bought, or sold. In the empire's archives, there are old books and papers that show the names, ages, and origins of many enslaved people. These records also included the prices paid for each person, and sometimes even what skills or special qualities they had. Bureaucrats and tax collectors treated slaves like any other property. They wrote reports about how many boys were needed for the palace or the army, and how many women were required for the sultan's harem. They created lists to show how often each village had given children to the empire. Sometimes they wrote letters to their bosses asking for more slaves or reporting problems with slave markets. These documents still exist today and show that the empire did not try to hide what it was doing. In fact, they were proud of how well their system worked. Other big empires in history also used slavery and had their own ways to keep records. For example, the Roman Empire kept lists of its slaves, and European kingdoms had their own slave markets. But the Ottoman system was different because it lasted for hundreds of years and was part of the government itself. Slavery, the taking of boys for the army, and the use of women for pleasure were not just hidden crimes. They were official policy, run by people with jobs and offices. But numbers and records cannot capture the true cost. To find that, we must look at the scars left on entire communities and generations. The effects of these systems were felt by everyone, not just the people who were taken. Families left behind suffered great pain. Mothers and fathers never knew what happened to their children. Some spent the rest of their lives waiting and hoping for their return, but most never saw their loved ones again. Villages became quieter, with fewer children playing and fewer families celebrating happy times. The fear of losing another child always hung in the air. For the children who were taken, the trauma was deep and long-lasting. Many grew up feeling lost, angry, or empty inside. They were forced to forget their families and everything about their old lives. They had to become loyal to the empire, even when it hurt them. Over time, some of these boys and girls started to believe that what happened to them was normal, because everyone around them acted the same way. Sadly, some children who survived these harsh systems later became part of the same cycle. As adults, they were sometimes ordered to help choose or train new children for the palace or harem. In this way, the pain was passed from one generation to the next. People who had been victims became helpers in the same system, because they had no other way to survive. The empire also used special lessons and religious teaching to make people accept these things. Children were told that being taken or serving the sultan was an honor, and that those who were different did not matter. Over time, people stopped questioning the system and started to see it as a normal part of life. This made it even harder for anyone to resist or escape the pain. Even as foreign observers watched, few spoke out. Diplomatic priorities and trade kept most powers silent, even as the wound spread beyond Ottoman borders. Foreign visitors, such as ambassadors and traders from Europe and other countries, saw what was happening in the Ottoman Empire. Some wrote letters and reports about the things they witnessed. They described the slave markets, the sadness of the families, and the strange rules inside the palace. However, most of these outsiders did not try to stop these practices. Many European countries were focused on making money from trade with the Ottomans. They did not want to risk losing business by speaking out against the empire's actions. In some cases, neighboring kingdoms and empires copied some of the Ottoman systems. They also started to use slaves in their own countries or looked at the Ottoman way of managing people as a strong example. Over time, the ideas about slavery, the use of child soldiers, and the buying and selling of people spread to new places. The pain and trauma caused by these actions did not stay only inside the Ottoman lands. Even after the Ottoman Empire ended, the effects of these practices did not disappear. Many families across Europe, Africa, and the Middle East still remember the pain and stories passed down from their ancestors. In some regions, people are still searching for the truth about what happened to their relatives. The fear and loss continued for many generations, making it hard for some communities to rebuild trust or feel safe. Today, as we search for truth in old archives and living memory, we face an uncomfortable but vital reckoning. The Ottoman Empire was one of the largest and longest-lasting empires in history. Its rule covered many lands and millions of people for centuries. But behind the power, wealth, and beautiful buildings, there was a very dark side that hurt many families, children, and women. The empire's systems of slavery, forced child collection, and sexual exploitation were not accidents or mistakes. They were carefully planned and managed by officials, written in records, and carried out for generations. These policies did not just affect the people who were taken or sold. The pain spread to their families, villages, and even to later generations. Many children grew up never knowing their real families. Many parents lived with broken hearts, always wondering what happened to their sons and daughters. The wounds from these practices are still felt today in some communities. It is important to remember this history, even if it is difficult or uncomfortable. Forgetting or ignoring the past means the same mistakes can happen again. We must learn from these stories so we can protect people from abuse and exploitation in the future. Understanding how power can be used to hurt others helps us be more careful with our own choices as a society. This story is not just about the Ottoman Empire. It is a warning about what can happen when power is unchecked and when the suffering of some people is ignored by others. The millions of victims, children, women, and families, deserve to be remembered with respect. By honoring their memories and telling their stories, we show that their pain was real, and we promise to watch for such dangers in our world today. History does not disappear just because it is painful. We must keep telling the truth and remain alert, so that no one is ever forgotten.